Donald Trump is now facing one of the most dangerous moments of this war with Iran, and the alarm is not just coming from his critics anymore. It is coming from diplomats, from legal experts, from international officials, and even from voices inside his own political world. In the middle of an already catastrophic conflict, Trump posted words that sent shockwaves across Washington, across the Middle East, and across the global media. He said that if Iran did not meet his demands, a whole civilization will die tonight. Those are not normal words from a president. Those are the words that have now turned a military crisis into a full-blown global emergency. And let me explain why this is so serious. Trump did not just threaten Iran's military. He did not just threaten leaders in Tehran. He used language that many officials and legal scholars say points directly at civilian society itself. Bridges, power plants, transport systems, and the very infrastructure that keeps ordinary people alive. In the same post, Trump also talked about complete and total regime change, then ended by saying, "Bless the great people of Iran." And that contradiction is part of what has made this moment so explosive. He is speaking as if he is threatening annihilation, while also claiming he is acting on behalf of the people he may be putting in danger. Here's what we know so far. Trump tied his threat to a hard deadline involving Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, the vital waterway through which roughly 1/5 of the world's oil passes in normal times. As that deadline approached, U.S. and Israeli strikes intensified. Reuters reported attacks on railway and road bridges, an airport, and a petrochemical plant. So AP reported that airstrikes hit bridges and a train station, while U.S. forces struck military infrastructure on Karg Island, a key Iranian oil hub. So this was not just rhetoric. The words were landing at the same time bombs were landing, and that is what raised the fear level so dramatically. But here's where it gets even more intense. As those threats spread, civilians inside Iran began gathering around possible targets. Reports and videos showed people forming human chains at bridges and near power plants, apparently trying to shield critical infrastructure from attack. Iranian officials had urged people to gather around potential targets, and BBC coverage captured the extraordinary scene of civilians standing in defense of the systems that keep cities running. Think about that for a moment. Ordinary people lining up in front of bridges and energy sites because they believe their country may be hours away from a devastating new escalation. That image alone tells you how terrifying this moment has become. Now, this is important as there were signs that diplomacy had not completely died. Pakistan pushed for a 2-week pause, urging Trump to extend his deadline and give negotiations more time. Reuters reported that Tehran was positively reviewing a Pakistani request for a 2-week ceasefire to allow more diplomacy. At the same time, there were conflicting reports about communication channels. Some reports said Iran had cut direct contact with Washington, while Reuters also reported that messages were still moving through mediators just hours before the deadline. So the picture here is chaotic, but one thing is clear: whatever diplomatic space existed was collapsing under the weight of Trump's rhetoric and the accelerating strikes. That matters because Iran has not been signaling weakness. Tehran rejected a temporary ceasefire proposal and made clear it wanted something far bigger, a lasting end to the war, guarantees against renewed attacks, and terms that would reshape the regional balance. Iranian officials also warned that if the U.S. or Israel expanded attacks on civilian infrastructure, Iran would respond against regional energy networks and could widen the conflict dramatically. Reuters reported that Iran had already said it would stop holding back from targeting Gulf neighbors' infrastructure and that a Saudi petrochemical complex had been hit. This is the nightmare scenario analysts have feared from the beginning, one conflict turning into a chain reaction across the region. And the global reaction has been immediate. The head of the United Nations said he was deeply troubled. Pope Leo said threats against the population of Iran were unacceptable. France's foreign minister warned that attacks on civilian and energy infrastructure could amount to war crimes. Iran's ambassador at the UN called Trump's words incitement to war crimes and potentially genocide. A former U.S. State Department legal advisor told Reuters the remarks could plausibly be interpreted as a threat to commit genocide under U.S. and international law. That is not just political spin. That is the language of international law entering the center of the story. And yet inside the United States, the reaction may be even more startling. Some of Trump's own allies are now openly talking about removing him from office. NBC reported that Alex Jones and Marjorie Taylor Greene called for the cabinet to use the 25th Amendment. CNN reported that Candace Owens joined that call, and even Anthony Scaramucci argued Trump should be removed. Tucker Carlson, once one of Trump's most reliable defenders, reportedly urged military aides to refuse any order that would slaughter Iranian civilians, including through a possible nuclear strike. So this is not just Democrats sounding the alarm. This is Trump's own coalition beginning to fracture in public. Let me put that in perspective. The 25th Amendment is one of the most extreme constitutional mechanisms in American politics. It would require the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to declare the president unable to perform the duties of the office. CNN notes there is no sign that J.D. Vance or Trump's cabinet is actually moving in that direction right now. But the fact that this conversation is happening at all and happening across ideological lines tells you how deeply Trump's language has rattled people. These are not routine calls for accountability. These are emergency calls rooted in fear about what he might do next. And then there is the nuclear question. This is where the story becomes almost surreal. After Trump threatened that a whole civilization will die, some critics and even some former allies openly wondered if he was signaling something beyond conventional escalation. CNN reported that some figures feared Trump was alluding to nuclear weapons. A France 24 report citing expert analysis said the threat had sparked nuclear speculation, though experts also argued an actual U.S. nuclear strike on Iran remains highly unlikely because the political, humanitarian, and environmental costs would be enormous. The White House pushed back on those fears. But once a president uses language like this, the line between speculation and terror becomes dangerously thin. Why does that matter so much? Because under the U.S. system, the president has extraordinary authority in military decision-making, including nuclear command authority. There are legal checks, and military officers are obligated to reject illegal orders, but the speed of modern escalation is exactly what makes rhetoric so dangerous. When a president sounds volatile in public, allies panic, enemies harden, markets freeze, and military planners start gaming out worst-case scenarios. This is why even unlikely possibilities matter. In a crisis like this, panic itself becomes a weapon. And while all of this was unfolding, Vice President J.D. Vance was in Hungary standing next to Viktor Orban and launching into attacks on the European Union, while also accusing elements of Ukrainian intelligence of trying to influence elections in the United States and Hungary. Reuters quoted Vance calling Brussels' conduct one of the worst examples of foreign election interference he had ever seen, and saying that some within Ukrainian intelligence had tried to put their thumb on the scale of American and Hungarian elections. Critics see that as a stunning split screen. So while the Middle East edges toward a darker and wider war, the vice president is overseas talking culture war, EU interference, and Orban's election. That split screen feeds a larger concern about this administration's priorities. On one side, you have military escalation, threats against civilian infrastructure, and a rapidly shrinking diplomatic window. On the other side, you have a vice president publicly boosting an authoritarian-friendly ally in Europe and repeating claims about election interference that mirror broader geopolitical talking points. For critics, it looks like a government that is losing coherence right at the moment the world needs disciplined leadership. And in a crisis, confusion at the top is not a side issue. It becomes part of the crisis itself. Now, if you are wondering why viewers around the world should care so deeply about this, the answer is simple. This is not just about Trump and Iran. This is about what happens when threats against civilians become normalized. It is about whether global powers can openly talk about destroying bridges, power grids, and the foundations of daily life, then call that strategy. It is about whether a regional war can trigger blackouts, oil shocks, mass displacement, and new fronts across the Gulf. And it is about whether the world's most powerful military can be steered by impulse, rage, and public ultimatums rather than disciplined statecraft. There is also a deeper political story here. Trump rose by telling voters he would end endless wars. He sold himself as the outsider who would reject the failures of the foreign policy establishment. But now, as NBC reported, some of the most recognizable figures in MAGA media are openly saying this war posture betrays the movement's core promise. That kind of backlash may not stop a missile, but it changes the domestic political environment. It tells lawmakers, military officials, and even cabinet members that if they draw a line here, they will not be standing alone. And still, despite all of this, the battlefield is moving faster than the politics. Iranian missiles have already hit regional targets. Saudi Arabia said it intercepted ballistic missiles and drones. Warnings went out to U.S. citizens in parts of the region. Kuwait issued precautionary measures. Reuters reported booms in Doha late Tuesday night. These are the sounds of a conflict that no longer fits inside one country's borders. Every hour that passes without a credible off-ramp increases the risk of miscalculation, and once that happens, Events start driving leaders instead of the other way around. So where does this leave us tonight? It leaves us at a hinge point. Trump has escalated his language to a level that many say crosses moral, legal, and political red lines. Iran is signaling that it will not simply fold under threat. Diplomacy is flickering, but barely. International outrage is growing. And inside America, even some of Trump's former champions are no longer defending him. Like, they are warning the country about him. That is the story now. Not just a war abroad, but a crisis of judgment at the very top. And as this story keeps developing, one question is hanging over everything. Is this the moment when the world steps back from the brink, or the moment when one man's threats push an already burning region into something far worse? Let me know what you think, because this is no longer just breaking news. It is a test of how far a president can go before the world and his own country decide enough is enough.